Well, I'm ready now. Go for it. Well, hello again. We're back at the Politics of Evolution. This, as you recall, when we left off, we were in the middle of the second section of the course. And the second section of the course is when we are discussing conflicts within evolutionary biology that have political implications. And the first one we discussed was the question of the pace of evolution. We discussed punctuated equilibrium and so forth. You remember that. The second one we discussed was sociobiology, and more specifically the controversy over evolutionary biology. And today we're going to discuss the controversy over the question of whether evolution is progressive. Now, before I do that, let me remind you, what we're talking about here is arguments. That is, somebody is trying to convince you to come to a certain conclusion. And to do that, they are giving you reasons and they're discussing evidence. And one of the things you are trying to do is evaluate their arguments and see if you are persuaded by them. Now, when you write your essay, depending upon which of the three internal controversies you write about, you won't just be writing about an argument. You'll be making an argument about an argument. That is, you will be arguing to your own conclusion about how one evaluates this controversy. It's even possible, in fact, it's likely, that you will be making arguments about arguments about arguments. That is, you will be reading somebody else's argument about an argument by Stephen Jay Gould, for example. Say you will be evaluating Richard Dawkins' criticism of Stephen Jay Gould. So you will be making an argument about Dawkins while Dawkins is making an argument about Gould. It's marvelously complicated, but you have to keep it in your head what exactly you're doing. That is, whose argument you're making an argument about. It's not impossible by any means, but it can get confusing if you let your mind wander. So, right now, I'm going to give you a lecture on the third controversy within evolutionary biology. So let's talk about that. I should tell you I have put online on Canvas, I have put the brief outline and list of concepts that would normally be on the screen if we were in a lecture hall. Now, of course, these concepts won't be on the test because we're no longer going to have tests. Nevertheless, it will help you, I think, to understand my argument, understand what I'm saying in the lectures, if you keep in mind that I think that these concepts are very important for understanding what we're doing here. I've also put online, and here is where the changes wrought by the virus get serious. I'm putting on Canvas my personal, detailed lecture outline. So I will be occasionally referring to this lecture outline as I talk. Remember, I wrote this lecture outline for me, not for students. That means that when you look at it, it may be too detailed in some spots and not detailed enough in other spots. Nevertheless, if you want information, this is information rich. One of the ways you may wish to proceed right now is that you may want to pause the lecture, download and print out both of these, and follow along with them while you watch me. That way you can occasionally pause the playback of the recording and look at an outline to get a detailed description over something I may go over too rapidly in this recording. So here we are. The controversy is evolution progressive? So, what scientists know now is that the sun is about 4.6 billion years old. The Earth came into being not too long after the sun came into being. And the Earth, one of the 4 rocky inner planets, at first had no life on it. It had no life, no oxygen, therefore, of course, no vegetation. At the beginning, there was no water. The land area of the Earth was covered with volcanoes, and there were many meteor and asteroid impacts. A very bad place to have a vacation. Paleontologists and other scientists have tried to piece together the way that the Earth and then life more or less evolved together. There is direct evidence for life on Earth back to about 2.7 billion years in the past. There's indirect evidence for life about another billion years in the past. So in a ballpark figure, life has been on Earth for about 3.7 billion years. The indirect evidence for life on Earth is basically that there is, in very old rocks, there is evidence of oxygen, oxygenation, rust. And since there was no oxygen at the beginning, and oxygen is a product of life, when they have evidence of oxygen in the rocks that are 3.7 billion years old, they infer that there was life on Earth 3.7 billion years ago. This life was one-celled. All life on Earth was about one-celled, which is basically bacteria, until about 600 million years ago. And what that means is, for most of the history of life on Earth, life had only a single cell. Now there is a question about how life originated. And the best answer, the most honest answer is, nobody knows. As you recall, Darwin starts from what might be called that first self-replicating molecule on Earth. And he says, essentially, I can describe how life evolved once that first self-replicating molecule came into being. But I don't know how that first molecule got here. Now, of course, he wrote that in 1859, and it's now 2020, and scientists still don't know exactly how life originated on Earth. That lack of knowledge, of course, gives an opening to creationists who say that they know, but we're not going to get into that controversy in this lecture. The fact that scientists don't know exactly how life originated doesn't mean that there's no theories. There have many theories. The most popular theory is that life probably originated in what they called a primeval soup. Here's my definition. Well, you're not going to take a test on this, but I'm going to define it for you anyway. Primeval soup, the mix of water and chemicals on the earth about 3.7 billion years ago, in which the first self-replicating molecule originated. All organisms that so far have been tested by scientists, all plants, animals, bacteria, mold, fungus, everything, uses the same DNA code. And that is very good evidence that all life on Earth originated from one organism 3.7 billion years ago. I'm quoting from a book by Richard Dawkins. The evidence from comparison among genes is converging rapidly and decisively on a single great tree of life. That quotation, of course, being a quotation, is online. However, scientists have not been able to create life in the laboratory. And because they have not been able to do so, none of their theories is considered to be true yet. So, let's go on now. Directly to the question of whether evolution is progressive. So, until about 600 million years ago, life consisted of organisms that either had no cellular structure or were single-celled. There's some evidence that indirect evidence that multicellular animals have been around for about 1 billion years, but what we know is that there was an explosion of multicellular life. Explosion, of course, is a metaphor. An explosion of multicellular life about 540 million years ago. These original, primitive, multicellular organisms have evolved into everything we see around us now, from starfish to redwood trees to humans. Those are the facts, but the real importance is how we interpret the facts. And in terms of interpretation, as in so much else, the politics lies in the interpretation, or I should say in the different interpretations. So the question is, does the fact that life evolved from a single molecule 3.7 billion years ago to everything that is fantastically complicated and diverse we see today, does that mean that multicellular organisms are somehow more evolved than single-cell organisms? Does the fact that such capacities as sight and intelligence have evolved mean that such attributes as sight and intelligence are more evolved, more fit, perhaps? In particular, and here we really get to the nitty-gritty of the question, are we humans with our big brains more evolved than other organisms? Are we the crown of creation? A related question is, are we humans inevitable? That is, at the moment that one self-replicating molecule started making copies of itself 3.7 billion years ago, was it inevitable that life would evolve to create something like human beings? That is, multi-celled organisms with huge brains that are self-aware. That's a surprisingly warm topic of controversy within biology. Another related question is, for those who think that we were not inevitable, does that mean that we were just accidents? That is, we are the end product of a billion lucky breaks down through the history of life? This may seem like a very esoteric, complicated problem, but in fact, it has important implications for how we see ourselves in relation to other organisms. And as I'm going to talk about shortly, various biologists, including E.O. Wilson and Gould, believe that it's because we think of ourselves as more evolved, that is superior to other organisms, that we are engaged in trashing the planet. And therefore we should change our attitudes. Now, when we're thinking about this particular issue, about we are the most involved, I want you, dear students, I want you to suppress the desire to let your ego do your thinking for you. That is, we humans, we have to set aside this idea that because we're us, we're the best. We have to start thinking about what is the evidence that we are actually the best. It's the fact that we are the only species who is able to consider these topics does not mean that we're better than other species. It just means that we do something better than other species do. But as we know now, there are plenty of other species that do a lot of things better than we do. So we're going to put aside this assumption that we probably had to this very moment that we are the crown of creation, that we are the best species on the planet. And we're going to actually consider the question in a scientific way. Are we the best species on the planet? Or are we just one of a bunch of other interesting organisms? So, now we come to the more explicitly political part of our discussion here. And that is this discussion of merit versus chance. Now, over the course of the semester in class, I've talked several times about conservatism and liberalism and how conservatives and liberals look at life and how conservatives and liberals look at economics and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're going to do that again, and this time we're going to make it directly relevant to the question of whether evolution is progressive. So let's talk a little about merit. What is the idea of merit? Let me define merit for you. It's the idea that organisms in general, and Homo sapiens in particular, that's us, and individual humans, very particularly, survive and prosper because they are superior in some quality to others who do not survive and prosper. Another way of saying that is, we're here now after 3.7 billion years because we're better. But there's also the specifically political aspect of that idea. People on the right of the political spectrum, conservatives, emphasize that character, intelligence, behavioral choices, and many other things determine how a person ends up in life today. And by ends up, I mean basically how much wealth and power they have. Or to put it another way, conservatives believe that people who have wealth and power have wealth and power because they deserve to have wealth and power, because they have more merit, because they're better people in essence than those people who don't have so much wealth and power. So this philosophical assumption that merit determines outcome in human life is a moral assumption also. And if you are thinking back to some discussions we've had previously this semester, you know that that was basically Herbert Spencer's argument, that the people who end up on top in life deserve to end up on top. So that's conservative social Darwinism. That particular assumption that the people who have wealth and power are the fit in life also leads to the implication that government should not be redistributing wealth and power. That to redistribute wealth and power goes against merit and what people deserve to have. On the other hand, left-wingers, liberals, progressives tend to emphasize the importance of chance in life. That is, luck. Let me define chance for you. The idea that organisms, the species Homo sapiens, an individual human survive and prosper, or fail to survive and prosper, largely because of factors that have nothing to do with merit, but are the result of random processes. Left-wingers essentially say, it's luck. You were born with certain genes. You caught diseases as a child, or you didn't catch diseases as a child. You were born into a poor country, or you weren't born into a poor country. Within the United States, you were born into poverty, or you were born into wealth. All of these things are just questions of luck. You don't deserve to be rewarded for having won life's lottery. That view, by the way, is consistent with when we discussed the sociobiology. Remember, I discussed the standard social science model, the idea that culture determines everything, the idea that merit is not important, that chance rules life, is consistent with the standard social science model, and it is a left-wing, liberal political idea. Left-wingers, therefore, believe that there is a moral justification for government redistributing wealth and power and the other goodies of life, because the people who have more wealth and power are not superior, do not have more merit, don't deserve more of what there is to get. So, right-wing, conservative, emphasizes merit, opposed to redistribution of wealth. Left-wing, liberal, progressive, emphasizes chance and is in favor of redistribution of wealth and power. Well, that's politics. Let's bring it back to evolutionary theory. Biologists have argued for a long time whether they were talking politically or simply about evolution. They've argued for a long time about whether there's such a thing as more evolved and less evolved. It's obvious that some creatures are simpler and some creatures are more complex. But does that mean that the more complex creatures are more evolved? Remember, the point of being evolved is to be better adapted to an environment. But is greater complexity a sign of better adaptation? Bacteria have been around for much longer than humans have, and there's many more kinds of bacteria than there are kinds of multicellular animals. And on Earth, the greatest biomass, if you totted up everything and weighed it, the greatest biomass on Earth would probably be bacterial. So does that mean that bacteria, very simple organisms, are the most evolved, are the fittest? Well, Stephen Jay Gould wrote a book on this topic, and his argument was complexity does not equal more merit in terms of evolutionary survival. His book was entitled Full House. And he says there, we do not live in the age of humans, or in the age of mammals, or even in the age of multicellular life. We live now in the age of bacteria. Our planet has always been in the age of bacteria. Furthermore, as Gould and several other people have pointed out, some organisms have advanced into complexity and then become simpler because they were better adapted when they became simpler. Snakes lost their legs, for example. There are many parasites, tapeworms, for example, that have evolved to become much less complex. And there are many examples of parasites becoming simpler over time as they become better adapted to their host organisms. So, if greater complexity doesn't make an organism more evolved, does anything make it more evolved? Evolutionary biologists now still debate the question, and one of the reasons they can't come to a conclusion is because the conclusion is a political one. However, if we take, for example, Stephen Jay Gould, who says there is no direction to life, there is no more evolved and less evolved. You cannot say that this particular organism is more fit. There are some people who say, yes, you can. There are adaptations which make an organism better evolved and better able to survive. They are, in other words, improvements. So, let's try and tie science, evolution, and politics more closely together. In the book Wonderful Life, I've given you a chapter in your assigned reading. In the book Wonderful Life, Gould argues that essentially evolution over 3.7 billion years has been a matter of luck. Organisms survive because they're lucky, not because they have superior merit. The word he uses is contingency. So here's the definition of contingency. It's Gould's term for the random quality he saw in the history of life. Since life began in no cells and then single cells, he says, and then evolved to become more complex, that doesn't mean that more complexity is better evolved. Life could not evolve to become less complex. It was impossible. It had to evolve parts to become more complex. So here he says, the vaunted progress of life is really random motion away from simple beginnings, not directed impetus toward inherently advantageous complexity. Or in other words, the survival of some organisms and the extinction of others did not happen because the survivors were better adapted. It was all a matter of luck. So, in the first place, it's impossible to prove that a surviving organism was better adapted. The only evidence we have is that it survived, and you can't use the evidence of its survival to prove that it was superior and therefore survived. In the second place, we know that some organisms survived because they happened to have adaptations evolved for other purposes that proved to be useful under new conditions. For my discussion of Gould's discussion of diatoms, look in my book on Gould on pages 64 and 65. It was sheer chance, he says, that this previous adaptation happened to be useful under new circumstances. And the example he uses is, you all know about the famous comet that hit the Earth 65 million years ago and caused a mass extinction, including the extinction of the dinosaurs. Well, many other smaller creatures went extinct too, and many small creatures survived. And Gould argues that many creatures survived because they had evolved adaptations for other purposes before the comet hit. But whatever adaptation they had helped them to survive after the comet hit. So it was all a matter of luck as to which species went extinct and which survived. So what is Gould doing here? He's taking this political left-wing view that human life is all a matter of luck, and therefore there is no such thing as merit. He's taking that principle and he's applying it to the history of life. He's trying to make a political point that's not just about human politics, but is something that derives from the whole history of life on Earth. That's left-wing social Darwinism on steroids. So, his book is Wonderful Life, as I said. It was a bestseller in 3 countries in 1989. In it, he argued for the contingency of evolution in general and human evolution particularly. So it's much of the book. It's a discussion of fossils preserved in the Burgess Shale, which was a Canadian find of creatures from 505 million years ago. He discusses a variety of species that do not seem to be the ancestors of anything today. He then points out that the animals alive today must have descended from the survival of the creatures in the Burgess Shale era. He argued that there's nothing we could see that would make animals more fit than others. So he concludes that those who survived and those who became extinct did so because of just the randomness of life, not fitness. So, quote, "If we face the Burgess Shale honestly, we must admit that we have no evidence, not a shred, that losers in the Great Decimation were systematically inferior in adaptive design to those who survived. Therefore, we, who are descended from the survivors of that era, we were not inevitable. We're just the beneficiaries of cosmic luck." So, he says, wind back the tape. Let's do a thought experiment. Let's wind the tape of evolution back in our heads to that first self-replicating molecule. And now, let it unwind again, going through history. Gould says it would not unwind in the same way. Random chance would govern. So, Gould's argument is that if the tape of life were to be wound back to the beginning and allowed to unspool again for 3.7 billion years, human beings would not have evolved because we are not superior in any way. We are not inevitable. So, I'm quoting, and of course your quotes are online. Wind back the tape of life to the early days of the Burgess Shale. Let it play again from an identical starting point, and the chance becomes vanishingly small that anything like human intelligence would grace the replay. Each replay of the tape would yield a different set of survivors and a radically different history. In other words, our species, Homo sapiens, we are just the result of a long list of lucky survivors. In a different spin of the evolutionary wheel, we wouldn't be here. Our intelligence seems to us to be a really big deal. But in the long sweep of the history of life, it may prove to have been a bad thing. In the first place, we've not lasted very long as a species. If you think life has been on Earth 3.7 billion years, multicellular life has been on Earth for, give or take, 600 million years. Human beings have been on Earth for about 300,000 years. We've just been around for a tiny amount of time. Not even a billion years. Not even a million years. And we humans like to make fun of the dinosaurs and talk about things that are destined to go extinct as a dinosaur metaphor. But the dinosaurs were around for hundreds of millions of years. We haven't been around for 1 million yet. So let's not go boasting about our intelligence just yet. In the second place, back to the discussion of the excellence of bacteria. I do realize that bacteria can't laugh or cogitate, and that philosophical claims for our greater importance can be based on the importance of this difference between them and us. But do remember that we can't live life on basalt and water 6 miles under the Earth's surface, form the core of novel ecosystems based on the Earth's interior heat rather than solar energy, or serve as a possible model for cosmic life in most solar systems. Unquote. So, we humans, A, we're no better in any evolutionary sense than any other species. B, we're just here by accident, not because our big brains gave us some sort of evolutionary advantage. C, we have no moral superiority. Well, let's go back to merit versus chance then. Gould is saying that the whole history of life is like human politics. The people who are on top, the species who are on top, don't deserve to be on top. They just won the lottery. They're just lucky. And therefore they have talking about humans, they have no moral claim to be better than any other species, just as the people who are wealthy and powerful on Earth now have no moral claim to have more wealth and power than anybody else. Now there's a direct, relevant point to be made here, is that we human beings have to stop thinking we're so important and therefore stop wrecking the planet and making other species extinct. So this attitude of Gould's, that because we're not important, we should stop thinking that we can cut down the rainforest and get rid of frogs and do all overfish the oceans and do all the things to the ecology that is destructive that we're doing now. This attitude is not just Gould's attitude. You may have recalled that in a previous lecture I talked about the conflict between Gould and E.O. Wilson over the question of social biology. They were pretty hot and heavy at each other there for a while. But on this particular issue, that human beings should stop acting destructively towards the rest of life, Gould and Wilson are absolutely in concert. So, Wilson has written a number of articles and books on this theme, that we should stop thinking of ourselves as superior and start being more nurturant towards other life forms. Here's something he wrote in 2001. The natural world, this is Wilson now, the natural world in the year 2001 is everywhere disappearing before our eyes. Cut to pieces, mowed down, plowed under, gobbled up, replaced by human artifacts. Here's something he wrote in 2006. Signals abound that the loss of life's diversity endangers not just the body, but the spirit. If that much is true, the changes occurring now will visit harm on all generations to come. The ethical imperative should be, therefore, first of all, prudence. We should judge every scrap of biodiversity as priceless while we learn to use it and come to understand its meaning to humanity. So, that's just pretty much what Gould wrote here. Success in our profession's common battle for preserving biodiversity requires the reorientation of human attitude toward other species, from little care and maximal exploitation to interest, love, and respect. How can this change occur if we continue to view ourselves as better than all others by cosmic design? there's no sign that Gould and Wilson ever read a poet by the name of Robinson Jeffers, but they are here reproducing an attitude that Jeffers emphasized over and over again in his own poetry in the 1940s, 50s, 60s. I put a famous poem by Robin Jeffers online. It's called Carmel Point. It's from 1954. He called on humans in this poem to uncenter themselves, to stop making themselves the most important thing on earth, to stop making their own desires more important than the needs of nature. And that, in Jeffers' poetic words, which you can go read, it's exactly what Wilson and Gould are saying in their quasi-scientific writing, is that we have to uncenter ourselves and stop looking at nature as something that we can grind up into money. Well, let's go back now to Gould's thesis about the fact that it's all luck, that human beings are not more evolved or better than other creatures, that if the tape of life were to be rewound, the end point would not be the same. That is, of course, as I've just said, it's a political point, it's a philosophical point, but it's also a scientific point, and it has not gone unchallenged. So, let's talk about some other famous evolutionary biologists and what they had to say about it. Some of them have agreed with Gould. Here's a very famous evolutionary biologist named Ernst Meier. The more I study evolution, the more I am impressed by the uniqueness, by the unpredictability, and by the unrepeatability of evolutionary events. Here's another very famous evolutionary biologist, George Gaylord Simpson. The assumption so freely made by astronomers, physicists, and some biochemists that once life gets started anywhere, humanoids will eventually and inevitably appear, is plainly false. The chance of duplicating man on any other planet is the same as the chance that the planet and its organisms have had a history identical in all essentials with that of the Earth through some billions of years, unquote. So, Gould is not alone in thinking that we're basically the product of a billion lucky breaks. But there are also equally famous and distinguished scientists who don't agree with that thesis at all. Here's a philosopher, Daniel Dennett. Daniel Dennett practically, I think he may have died, but he practically made a career of criticizing Gould. He pointed out that the fact that we have no evidence that would allow us to decide that the species that survived were superior to the ones that perished, as Gould argued, also means that we have no evidence that they were inferior. In fact, we have no evidence at all either way. I'm quoting Dennett. What is Gould's evidence for this suspicion? He offers none at all. What he offers is the fact that he, looking at, let's see, where are we? Looking at these amazing creatures in the shale, can't imagine why some would be better designed than others. They all seem about equally bizarre and ungainly to him. That's not good evidence that they didn't, in fact, differ dramatically in engineering quality, given their respective predicaments, unquote. Another famous evolutionary biologist, Simon Conway Morris, wrote an entire book to refute Gould's thesis in Wonderful Life. The book he wrote was entitled Life's Solution, and I have assigned you to read some passages in Life's Solution. What Simon Conway Morris points out is that many different creatures have independently evolved certain adaptations. And he asks, how can all these different creatures have evolved these adaptations unless these adaptations give an advantage in survival? So, for example, eyes. Eyes have independently evolved in squids, snails, polychaetes, jellyfish, arthropods, dinoflagellates, vertebrates, and other groups. It doesn't matter if you don't know what a polychaete or a dinoflagellate is. I don't either. That's not the point. They have eyes, and they evolved those eyes independently. It's not just eyes. Silk weaving has evolved in spiders, fungus gnats, midges, caddisflies, weaver ants, and silkworms. There are many other examples. So Morris says, yes, intelligence is an adaptation. It enables creatures to survive and evolve. We, humans, are at the end of an evolutionary process that has created us as the most intelligent creatures on Earth. That is not an accident. That has happened because intelligence is an adaptation that makes you survive. Therefore, Gould is wrong. If the tape of life were to be rewound and allowed to unwind again over evolutionary time, something like us, some very intelligent organism would evolve again, and some very intelligent organism would evolve every time the tape was rewound and then allowed to unspool. He says, this is Morris, if we had not arrived at sentience and called ourselves human, then probably sooner rather than later, some other group would have done so. Now, Morris does not then go on to explore the consequences, the implications of that point for Gould's political point about merit and chance and humans. But you can do that if you want to.